My name is Eleanor Langford, but everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 65, retired, and proud of the life I've built for myself in Portland, Oregon. I like my mornings quiet, the way sunlight slants across the wooden floors of my home, and the soft shuffle of paws on the hardwood when my neighbor's dogs wander into the yard. Today, though, calm didn't last long. "Mom, we're leaving tomorrow," Dylan shouted from the driveway, dragging his suitcase behind him. His wife, Heather, balanced another on her hip, her voice carrying over the engine hum. "It's a last-minute trip, just a few days," I blinked, gripping my coffee cup. "Tomorrow," I said. "Yes. You'll be fine here," Heather said, tossing a leash toward me. "Stay and take care of the dog. Be useful." The words hit harder than I expected. My pulse quickened. Years of cooking meals, managing schedules, and keeping the house spotless for a family that barely noticed me seemed to crystallize in that one sentence: be useful, as if my existence hinged on obedience, as if my life didn't belong to me. I stayed silent, forcing a polite smile as they scrambled to the car. Suitcases thudded, tires squealed, and within minutes, they were gone. The driveway, usually filled with neighborhood chatter, felt cavernous. I set the leash down and watched the empty street, the dog panting at my feet. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet settle around me. There was a simmering fire inside, a quiet determination, and I knew one thing clearly: I wasn't just going to be useful today. Dylan leaned against the car, tapping his phone with one hand while adjusting his sunglasses with the other. Heather hovered nearby, balancing her oversized tote bag and rolling suitcase. Their movements were brisk, efficient, and completely unconcerned with me standing on the porch, coffee still warm in my hands. "Mom?" "Seriously," Dylan said, glancing over his shoulder. "Just stay here, take care of the dog. It's really not that hard." His tone was light, casual, but carried the weight of expectation, the kind that assumes obedience without question. Heather chimed in, her voice soft but condescending. "You'll be fine, Ellie. Honestly, just make sure he doesn't get into trouble. You know how he gets." She pointed at the dog, whose tail thumped happily against the floor, oblivious to the tension in the air. I kept my expression neutral, nodding. But inside, a flicker of irritation burned steadily. Years of quietly keeping the household running, of smoothing over arguments and fixing mistakes, had built a quiet authority in me that these two seemed determined to ignore. Dylan smirked, tossing a leash toward me. "Here, take him for a walk if you want. Or just stay inside. Be useful." Okay, I caught the leash midair, my fingers tightening briefly around the handle. I could feel my pulse in my temples, a mix of disbelief and simmering anger. They hadn't just asked me to stay behind. They had reminded me, in the most subtle way, of exactly where I supposedly belonged in this family hierarchy. I let the leash fall into my hand, stepping back as they hustled to the car. Tires squealed on the driveway as Dylan shifted into gear. Heather waved, smiling with that thin, polite edge that masked impatience. Within moments, they were gone, leaving me alone with the dog, the quiet, and the unmistakable sting of being underestimated. I sat down at the kitchen table, the leash coiled loosely in my hand, and let the quiet settle around me. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, catching the dust motes in a golden haze, but even its warmth couldn't soothe the flush of irritation crawling up my neck. I could still hear Dylan's words echoing in my mind. Be useful. That casual command carried decades of dismissal, of being overlooked and undervalued. My thoughts drifted back to the early years, when Dylan was small, and I balanced late-night feedings with managing bills, cooking, cleaning, and bending to the needs of a family that rarely paused to appreciate the work behind the scenes. There were holidays spent fixing mistakes no one acknowledged, arguments smoothed over at my expense, and decisions made as if my voice didn't matter. Every sacrifice, every quiet act of labor had been taken for granted. I felt the familiar surge of anger rise, raw and insistent. But I didn't speak. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. Instead, I breathed, letting the fury settle into something sharper, more deliberate, a steady, strategic fire. I realized that reacting impulsively now would only feed their expectations, prove their assumptions that I existed solely to serve. The dog nudged my hand, oblivious to the tension, tail wagging. I stroked his fur, letting his warmth anchor me, a reminder of what I could protect and control. My eyes swept the room, the cabinets I had organized, the countertops polished, the home I had nurtured for decades. I had built this life, and no amount of casual arrogance from my son or his wife could erase that. A quiet smile tugged at my lips. Let them go on their trip, oblivious to the simmering power they had underestimated. Silence was my weapon now, patience my ally. I would watch, plan, and act in a way that would leave no doubt of who held the real authority here. I wandered slowly through the living room, my fingers brushing over the polished oak banister and the spines of books that had collected dust on the shelves. Every corner of this house held a memory. Dylan's first drawing taped to the refrigerator, Heather's initial visit when they were just dating, the careful placement of furniture I had arranged to maximize sunlight in the winter months. It was more than walls and windows. It was a life I had built, a sanctuary that had witnessed decades of work, love, and quiet perseverance. I paused at the desk in the corner, opening the drawers to find neatly stacked folders of mortgage documents, insurance papers, and property deeds. My eyes lingered on the originals, the signatures and stamps that proved the house belonged to me. Dylan and Heather had assumed, for years, that they had some inherent claim simply because they lived here at times, because they had helped with occasional chores, because they acted entitled. The audacity of that assumption simmered inside me. I moved from room to room, recalling moments of unnoticed labor, the nights spent patching the roof before winter storms, the weekends sanding and painting the walls, the countless evenings I spent organizing tax documents or fixing broken appliances. Each memory reinforced my understanding that the house, this space of tangible effort and love, was mine. In the guest room, I paused by the window where Dylan had once slept after a late night at college, and my hand rested on the windowsill, smooth from years of cleaning and polishing. I imagined him and Heather thinking they could dictate terms, thinking that casual presence equated to ownership. They were wrong. I gathered the folders carefully, placing them on the kitchen table. The weight of the papers in my hands felt symbolic, as if all the years of work, of patience, of sacrifices, were finally concentrated in this single moment. I would not confront them impulsively, nor would I let anger cloud my judgment, but I would act. Every document, every legal detail, every memory bolstered the plan forming in my mind. The house had been mine all along, and it was time to make sure everyone finally understood that. I spent the afternoon at the kitchen table, the folders of documents spread before me like a battlefield map. Each paper held a detail I could leverage: mortgage statements, property deeds, insurance policies, contact information for the bank, and the local real estate agent I had worked with years ago. I traced my finger along the lines of signatures, mentally rehearsing the steps I would need to take while Dylan and Heather were away. The dog nudged my knee, sensing the tension in the room. I scratched behind his ears absently, grounding myself in the small rhythm of care. He was the one constant in the chaos of family entitlement, and I intended to make sure he remained protected no matter what. I made discreet phone calls, confirming that all necessary paperwork could be processed quickly and legally, ensuring the house sale could go through without their knowledge. I mapped out a timeline in my head, from contacting the bank to arranging temporary care for the dog, to packing the essentials I would need if the plan succeeded. Every move had to be precise. No mistakes. No impulsive confrontations. I reviewed the numbers again, checking property valuations and transfer procedures. The thought of acting while they assumed everything would remain unchanged filled me with a quiet satisfaction. Years of being underestimated had honed my patience and planning skills. I would not yell, not argue, not announce my intentions. I would act deliberately, silently, and finally reclaim the authority that had always been mine. By the time evening fell, I had a complete strategy in place. The house, the dog, the control, they would all be firmly back in my hands, and when Dylan and Heather returned, they would realize too late just how thoroughly I had planned every detail. The morning air was crisp as I walked into the bank, the dog trotting obediently at my side. Everything had been arranged meticulously, appointments confirmed, documents notarized, accounts ready. The teller greeted me warmly, unaware of the tension thrumming beneath my calm exterior. I signed the final papers, feeling the weight of each pen stroke as a tangible reclaiming of what was rightfully mine. The transfer went through smoothly, the house officially no longer under my son and his wife's assumptions of ownership. I left the bank with a quiet sense of satisfaction, the dog's leash firmly in hand. Back at home, I moved through the house methodically, packing the few personal items I wanted to take with me: photographs, journals, and the little things that had made this space mine. Each item placed into the bag was a small victory, a reminder that control had shifted back to me. In the garage, I prepared the dog's essentials food, toys, his favorite blanket. He sniffed curiously at the bag, tail wagging, sensing the significance of the day without understanding it fully. I knelt to scratch behind his ears, letting a smile tug at my lips. The quiet bond between us was a steady reminder of what truly mattered. By the time I closed the front door behind me, the house was no longer a place of assumed authority for Dylan and Heather. It was a symbol of my careful planning, my patience, and my ability to act decisively. Every step I had taken was deliberate, measured, and irrevocable. The air hummed with anticipation. Soon, they would return, and everything they thought was theirs would be gone. I guided the dog down the quiet streets of Portland, the crisp morning air filling my lungs as he trotted alongside me, ears perked and tail wagging. Each step felt deliberate, a small declaration of independence. The familiar sights of my neighborhood, the corner coffee shop, the row of maples lining the sidewalk, the soft hum of early traffic reminded me of how much of my life I had quietly built and maintained. Today, it all felt like mine again. We arrived at my little guest house in the backyard, a space I had kept for myself long before Dylan and Heather began assuming it as theirs. I opened the door and let him explore, watching him sniff the corners, tail sweeping the floor. He paused by the window, sunlight glinting in his eyes, and I felt a warmth spread through me. This was more than a pet. He was a constant, loyal companion, a witness to my years of patience, my careful planning, and my quiet resilience. I knelt beside him, running my fingers through his fur, whispering softly as he leaned into my touch. In that moment, the weight of the last several days, the condescension, the dismissal, the subtle humiliation lifted slightly. I realized that reclaiming the house had been important. Yes, but this bond, this trust, was an equally tangible proof of my authority. and autonomy. Sitting on the small couch, I watched him curl up on his blanket, ears twitching as he dozed. I let myself reflect, unhurried, on the decades I had spent nurturing both home and family, often at my own expense. This was my space, my decision, my freedom. I had acted deliberately, and now, for the first time in a long while, I could feel the quiet satisfaction of victory that required no confrontation, only intention and resolve. The dog sighed contentedly, eyes closing, and I smiled. Today, we were both exactly where we belonged. The sound of tires crunching on the driveway alerted me before I saw the car. Dylan and Heather were home. I stepped onto the porch, dog at my side, tail wagging as if nothing in the world could surprise him. I already knew what was coming. The disbelief, the questions, the sharp edges of anger, but I remained calm. Letting the quiet of the morning settle around us, the front door swung open, and Dylan froze mid-step, a suitcase dangling from one hand. Heather's mouth dropped slightly, her sunglasses slipping down her nose. Their eyes scanned the yard, then the house, then me. The pause stretched long enough for the dog to bark once, tail wagging, before they seemed to realize what had happened. What? What do you mean the house is sold? Dylan's voice cracked, a mixture of confusion and outrage. Heather clutched the strap of her tote tightly. Ellie, how? Why? Her words stumbled over each other as disbelief gave way to fury. I folded my arms. The leash coiled neatly in my other hand. The house is no longer under your assumption, I said evenly, each word deliberate. Everything has been handled legally, and the dog is here, where he belongs. Dylan's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Heather as if seeking support. But both of them were caught in the shock of being outmaneuvered. The realization that their years of entitlement, of casual arrogance, had been met with careful planning and decisive action left them unmoored. Heather opened her mouth again, but no words came. Dylan's fists clenched at his sides. And then, reluctantly, he let them fall. The fire of indignation burned in their eyes, but my composure remained untouched. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to argue. Silence and certainty were more powerful than any confrontation I could have staged. The dog nudged my hand, grounding me, a living reminder of loyalty and trust. I took a slow breath, letting the tension wash over me and then recede. This house, this space, had always been mine. The control, the authority, the decision-making, everything I had quietly cultivated was firmly back in my hands. Finally, I spoke again, voice calm, clear, unshakable. You assumed, I acted, and now it's done. The words hung in the air, leaving Dylan and Heather to grapple with the reality they had so casually ignored for years. The house was quiet again, but this time it felt different. The tension that had hung in the air for years had lifted, replaced by a stillness that carried both relief and satisfaction. I sat in the sunlit corner of the living room, the dog curled up at my feet, breathing softly, and allowed myself to finally exhale. I reached for my journal, running a pen across the blank page, letting the words spill out of me. Each sentence captured the sequence of events, the condescending commands, the meticulous planning, the decisive actions that had finally restored a sense of balance. Writing it down made it real in a way that thinking alone never had. It wasn't revenge. It was reclaiming what had always been mine, asserting boundaries, and protecting what I valued most. Later, I called my friend Margaret, recounting the story carefully, savoring the disbelief in her voice as I described how smoothly the house sale had gone and how the dog was safe and content. She laughed, delighted by the poetic justice, but also admired the patience and forethought I had exercised. I realized that support and perspective from trusted friends made the lessons stick, turning a personal victory into something more meaningful. As the afternoon sun slanted across the floorboards, I thought about Dylan and Heather. They had assumed so much about me and the life I built, yet they had underestimated patience, planning, and quiet determination. The lessons were clear. Respect cannot be demanded. It must be acknowledged, and sometimes reclaimed with calm resolve. I stroked the dog's fur and smiled softly. Today, the house, the dog, and my sense of agency were intact. And more than anything, I understood that dignity was not just about appearances. It was about knowing your worth and holding fast to it, even when others try to rewrite the rules. Mornings had taken on a gentle rhythm I hadn't realized I'd missed. I brewed coffee slowly, letting the aroma fill the kitchen, and the dog padded quietly by my side, nudging my hand for an affectionate scratch. The house, once a site of tension and unspoken expectations, now felt entirely my own, a space I moved through at my own pace, guided only by my choices. I walked him through the neighborhood, the familiar streets of Portland, revealing little details I had never noticed before. The way sunlight hit the red brick sidewalks, the soft chatter of neighbors enjoying their morning routines, the faint scent of flowers from someone's garden drifting across the air. Every step was a reminder of freedom, of being able to live without constant oversight or silent judgment. Back at home, I spent time sketching ideas for a small herb garden in the backyard and planning a short trip I'd postponed for years. These projects weren't about impressing anyone. They were about reclaiming time, energy, and space that I could finally dedicate to myself. As I sorted through the folders of documents from the house sale, I appreciated the meticulous planning that had allowed me to act decisively without confrontation. That calm, strategic approach had become a quiet affirmation of my worth. The dog settled at my feet as I sat by the window, sunlight warming my shoulders, and I reflected on the past few weeks. Dylan and Heather's assumptions, their casual arrogance, had collided with patience, planning, and steadfast resolve, and I had emerged with dignity intact. Boundaries had been established, and I felt no need to revisit old arguments. The life I had quietly nurtured, both materially and emotionally, was now fully mine. Evenings passed with walks along the river, the soft glow of city lights reflecting on the water, and the companionship of the dog reminding me of loyalty and trust. I thought about the years ahead, not in terms of others' expectations, but in terms of my own desires, my own choices. Independence had a weighty, wonderful clarity, and I welcomed it fully. I smiled softly, scratching the dog's ears as he dozed beside me, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The house, the freedom, the life itself, all reclaimed, all earned. For the first time in a long time, I knew what it truly meant to live fully on my own terms.